Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We are here with my very special guest, Jennie Lee, author of True Yoga, Practicing with the Yoga Sutras for Happiness and Spiritual Fulfillment. Now, Jennie has shared healing benefits of classical yoga and meditation with thousands of clients over the past 17 years. And using the formula she writes in True Yoga, Jennie has helped people conquer paralyzing anxiety, depression, grief, PTSD, stress, attention deficit issues, physical abuse, eating disorders, and challenging relationship dynamics. Her writings have been featured in the Huffington Post, Mind Body Green, Yoga Therapy Today, and much more. So, welcome to the show, Jennie.
Thanks so much, Marianne. I'm really glad to be here.
So, Jennie, there are several things I really appreciate about your book. One is that no matter who you are, if you're new or been practicing yoga for some time, you can really turn to this book, pretty much any page, and get answers that will help you where you're at.
That's great to hear because I really wanted it to be a practical tool book for people. I came from many years of teaching in a yoga studio that I owned in Massachusetts and trying to convey some of the yoga philosophy to my students and having them be a little mystified by some of it and not really understanding how to apply it to their lives. And so my intention with True Yoga was to present these very, very timeless teachings in a way that made them relevant to today, relevant to the challenges that people are facing and the stressors that people are facing today, and giving people tools to work with. And that's why I include in each chapter actual daily practices and also questions for people to kind of ponder once they've gone on beyond the reading and just that they can hold in their hearts and continue to reflect upon. So, yeah, thank you for that reflection.
Oh, and it's it's just I just really enjoyed getting into it, and I know that you've been doing this work for over 17 years, and you've helped hundreds, probably thousands of people, all across the U.S. and world in being able to find a deeper meaning in their practice and helping them conquer anxiety and depression and grief and PTSD. So, in doing this, and I know you've had a journey too, can you explain to our listeners a little bit about, what has brought you to this point where you wrote the book?
Sure. Well, my studies in yoga started, as many people do, with strictly a physical practice. I was introduced to power yoga many, many, many years ago in Los Angeles, and I really responded, like I said, as many people do, to how the physical practice makes us feel stronger and more energetic. And it was a couple years into that I then must have been with a teacher that started to talk a little bit about the philosophy behind these postures. Where did this come from? I think I got curious about where this whole thing had come from. But it wasn't until I hit a really rough patch in my life that I got super serious about the study. As we all do, we have trauma and tragedy come to us, and I had been some difficult times in my marriage, and then lost a child at birth. And when all of that was happening, I was really seeking ways to just find center again, find equilibrium amidst a lot of depression and sorrow. And, my doctor wanted to put me on antidepressants, and I remember saying to him, I think that it's pretty normal for me to be sad right now. I don't need antidepressants. I just need to cry and get through this. Yeah. But I did need something more than to cry. I needed to find meaning in all of what life brings us, and the road back to being able to function happily for my son, who was my first child, who was 2 years old at that time. And so I started studying more of the yoga philosophy, and the Yoga Sutras, which is what this book, True Yoga, is based on, really, really have such wisdom about how to manage our thoughts, how to work with emotions, There's so many things that are common knowledge in Western psychology today that have roots back in this Eastern philosophy that is, 2,500 years old. So it's pretty interesting to see how timeless these teachings are and how we can hold on to something as simple. I'll give you an example. So there's a yoga sutra that says, if a thought is causing you suffering, change it to its opposite. Sounds pretty simple. Not always easy to wrap your head around, but if you can do it, you start to change the pattern of your mind. And we all know how easy it is to get looped into negative patterns of thought. And that's what takes us down, spirals us down into depression and anxiety. So to get a hold of that and use a simple tool like that diligently. I mean, you do have to be diligent. It takes discipline. It takes focus. But it does start to change things, and it helps you climb out of the holes that we can get in mentally and emotionally.
Mm. And that's actually a really good point, because, sometimes we kind of get into these places where it's like, how are we going to get out, How are we going to move beyond it? So,
yeah.
Well, you talk about the difference in your book between short-term about lasting happiness. Can you define the difference between the short-term and long-term lasting happiness?
Sure. We all, pretty much every day all we're doing is looking for ways to be happy. So whether it's the Starbucks latte or the conversation with a friend or working out at the gym or selling the next big deal or whatever, all the external ways that we pursue pleasure that bring us those hits of happiness, that's the short-term happiness. So I call it hits of happiness because it lasts for a little while, but if you notice, there's very little that sticks around. As soon as you've had the latte, you want another one 5 hours later.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't bring us to any real internal place of stability and true joy. So true joy is a quality, it's a soul quality that's within each one of us. And it's just something that needs to be uncovered. It's not something that has to be gained from the outside. It's really our innate nature. And the yoga teachings talk about this being able to move from the identification with the small self or this personality self that's moving through life seeking happiness in all these fleeting ways, and changing our perception to who we are as souls moving through this human life. And so really starting to identify with that spiritual self that's within. And the reason they coach us to do this is because the more we start to come into an awareness of that inner being, that inner spiritual being, that's where the joy lies. And so whether it's through a practice of meditation or prayer, this ability to move out of the temporary and constantly changing human dimension of things and sit as sort of a witness to all of it, then we are sitting in that place of joy, that innate nature, and then we're watching what's happening on the outside, and we're seeing how all these things that bring us pleasure temporarily are nice, but they're not. We don't have to put all our stock in them, if you will. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It really does. And so one of the things that you talk about in your book is as we're going through and working in our practice and finding, basically truth, that not all truths need to be revealed and spoken. And that really, I felt, was very important, because a lot of times people, will find like a truth and feel like, oh, okay, now I have to let everyone know.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more for our listeners about those differences?
Sure. Well, so there's two of the sutras that kind of stack up with each other. And the first one is ahimsa, which is peacefulness. And if we take that one first, then when we move to the second one that has to do with truthfulness, which is called satya, we have a container in which to deal with truthfulness. So we're not meant to just spout off every single thing that we feel is true if it is going to be harmful or hurtful to someone else. Certainly we're entitled to our own experience of truth and reality, but there is also the practice of walking in the world with a peaceful, kind, reverent, and respectful heart, which is the absolute foundation of the section of the Yoga Sutras called the Yamas. And in order to also contextualize truthfulness, we do have to separate the difference between our personal experience of what is true and universal or ultimate truth, because I think we can all relate to the fact that we can be in a situation and another person is in the same situation and we are experiencing it vastly differently. And therein lies personal truth. So we're entitled to our experience of the situation, and we can share that with the other person who's maybe having a totally different one and has a different quote, quote, truth about it. But that is different than the concept of universal truth, which comes when we really step out of all personal agenda, all personal perception, and we just sit in the stillness of a practice like meditation, where there is no ego, there is no I that is working for something, and we're just in the pure awareness of consciousness. And that's also, where the Yoga Sutras are really leading us, is to the ability to be in that place where then what happens when we experience that peace, that place of peacefulness and pure truth, when we step back into our human dynamics with relationships and colleagues and all that, we don't have such of a charge on our personal perceptions of truth. We still may have differing opinions, but we don't have this need to fight for them or convince somebody else that we're right, or it just makes the whole experience softer and gentler.
Yeah, and what a nice place to be in where, when we discover our truths, because what might be true for us, as you're saying and you're explaining, could be something completely true, different for somebody else. And then coming to a place where we find our truth, and it's like, okay, I don't need out of ego then to go ahead and make sure everyone's believing what I believe, because then that gets into control.
Yeah, and definitely, as we step onto the spiritual path, we have inspiration and we're starting to feel internal change that's really positive. We do want to share the practices or the teachings that have been meaningful to us with other people, especially those we care about. But honestly, to preach at someone is probably going to make them run the other way. They will appreciate the truth that we're wanting to share as it radiates through our lives, as we start living that truth and we become the very things that we're wanting to share with them. Our internal example and how it shows up in how we act in the world, that's really what's going to draw someone towards a particular teaching or path.
One of the things that, and also another chapter in your book that I really appreciated, was when you were discussing, it kind of comes in regards to attachment and how that, the question I have is how can attachment complicate our lives, but also in how when we remove this attachment, how that changes everything, and I really want you to explain that for our listeners, and I definitely have some very good questions on that.
Okay. Well, there's pretty much no way around attachment. We're all attached to different things at different levels, and certainly whether it's attachment to our particular routines or the way that we like things done in our environments, or just personal preference really is a part of attachment. But then you take it to the deeper place of we're attached to our loved ones, our children, our partners, and it's not that those attachments are bad. It's that they do, even those loving ones, they do keep us from a certain level of freedom. And this is a little tricky to explain, but let's take it back to the simpler realm of things, which is our personal preferences, our attachments to the way things are happening around us. And we can really expend a lot of emotional energy, again, trying to get our way. And there's a great amount of freedom and energy saved when we can start to think of things more from the standpoint of preference, like, it would be nice if it was that, but it's okay if it's not. And just letting go of some of that really tight grip on controlling everything, it just makes us feel lighter. It's not an easy thing to do, but it definitely does bring freedom. Of course, it is really, really the sort of the highest level of evolution to become completely unattached to all beloveds. And really, I think only those who might be ready for a monastic life might be able to move into that renunciation. But we can start with smaller things.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Just something as small as you often hear of when there's a cluttered home or cluttered workspace, and this is getting a little different from the yoga, but it all is kind of interrelated and interwoven at some point. But when you have a cluttered space, then it also gives way to a cluttered mind. And part of the whole yoga meditation practice, and we'll get into some of the differences in regard to that in just a minute here, but is being able to be in control of that. So it's interesting what you hear about people who maybe they've had their house really cluttered for a long time, or their space really cluttered for some time, and they go through and they have that cleared up. Just how much more free they feel, in that space. So
definitely. I just did a huge spring cleaning in my house, and I feel such a level of what I call psychic space. I'm about to launch into a new book project, and I just needed to really make space in my home environment so that I could mentally not be just bombarded by this pile of paperwork over here and this pile of to-dos over there. And so, yeah, it really does make a difference in our environments definitely make a difference in how we feel mentally and emotionally. So if clutter is an issue for anyone, I would definitely jump in and use the joy as a criteria. There's a great little book on the New York Times bestseller list right now called The Japanese Art of Decluttering, and she says, the author says, if something doesn't bring you joy, get rid of it. So that's a pretty great basis.
Oh, I love that too, and it really, when you start detaching from the physical material stuff in ways like that, it really does open up a whole new energetic place, for like how you're saying, to work in or to be in or to have your practice in, so your everyday yoga practice. If I can't find room to do it, it's not going to be much of a practice. So. And so how is yoga and meditation, how are they related?
Well, a lot of people don't think of them as being related because the physical practice of yoga has become so popular in the West. A lot of people perceive it really as a movement practice. And the Yoga Sutras are very, very clear that the movement that we do to create stability and ease and strength in our bodies is just a tiny, tiny fraction of what yoga really is. And that was another big intention in writing this book, was to bring that point forward. The Yoga Sutras lead us through many different practices that ultimately come to the point of meditation, which I like to explain meditation as being both a verb and a noun. So It is something that we do from the standpoint of we create a space, we discipline ourselves to sit down, we might do breathing techniques or mantra techniques to quiet the mind. But then it becomes a noun when we enter the state of stillness. And in the Yoga Sutras, they talk about meditation being the continuously inward flowing of consciousness, where all that external noise and movement on the outside is gone, and we are completely absorbed within in the stillness. And that's what all the other practices, all the moving practices, all the ethical practices, all these mental practices like we've been talking about so far with peacefulness, truthfulness, attachment, all of those contribute towards our ability to get to that practice and state of meditation. So you can't really take meditation out of yoga, because the word yoga means union, and it's the union of our individual consciousness that roams around in our human lives every day, and the universal or divine consciousness that we come from, that we're a part of, and that we're inseparable from, and that we're trying to reunite with in that state of stillness and have a more expanded perception of reality and truth.
That's just beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. So how does yoga therapy differ from, like if I'm going down the street and taking a yoga class?
Well, so yoga therapy has been my specialty for many years, and all yoga is therapeutic. So it's kind of a funny term, almost any, unless you're just doing some crazy workout that really is not really yoga based, but they're calling it yoga because there's a lot of that out there.
But all I've yoga, some of that, yeah.
yeah. True yoga is all therapeutic because it is the practices that take us back to true self. And but yoga therapy, as my work practice, is the application of the different yoga practices or tools to someone's particular situation. So if I have a client come in who, let's say, is struggling with anxiety, and then I'm going to look at very specific practices that might help her to manage that physically, mentally, and emotionally. And then we're also going to look at kind of the spiritual undercurrent of what might be going on in her life and in her belief system. And I'm not here to impose a spiritual belief system. I'm here to draw from the person really how they connect to spirit. What is spirit for them? And that's what's most important in yoga philosophy, is that we each have a personal experience of that, not something that is dogmatized or placed on us from the outside. So different from a yoga class in that yoga classes, you walk in, you're with a group, there's sort of a preset practice that's going to be offered to everyone. Yoga therapy usually is done one-on-one, occasionally is done in groups if there's a group that has a common issue such as grief. Maybe there are yoga therapy for grief groups. But it would be practices targeted specifically for whatever issue someone is dealing with. And the beauty of the yoga teachings is that there are thousands of practices that we can draw from to help people move through the challenges that they're facing. And I'll just go off on a tangent for 1 second. The reason that I got into yoga therapy was because I was actually studying for a master's in spiritual psychology, which would have set me up to take good clinical exams and go into a more traditional psychotherapy practice. But between the spiritual component of that program and the yoga philosophy that I was studying, I really started to see how the yoga teachings held what I feel are all the tools that we need to walk through life. Now, of course, that being said, unless there's a major chemical imbalance that needs to be dealt with medication, I really have seen the yoga practices bring great dramatic results for people in all different types of situations and difficulties. So I really trust it. Again, it's been around for thousands of years, and the original yogis knew something, and they knew it because they really downloaded this information from that divine consciousness. They weren't just making it up from their own experience. They were going into meditation and tuning in to source consciousness that it holds all truth.
Well, and that's definitely why yoga didn't become a fad so many thousands of years ago and just kind of, be a blip on the radar. I mean, it really does hold, as you're saying, those truths, and people can tell. I mean, when you're working on something, you can feel when it resonates with you as far as, you can tell when something's true and something's not true. Now, the one thing that I'm seeing here, and I've always, I've enjoyed, is that you can actually do yoga therapy with somebody. They don't have to come to the lovely island of Oahu for, although that's a good excuse to hit the islands. That'd be a good one for me. But, I mean, they don't have to actually come to Oahu to go ahead and have a yoga therapy session with you. You can do that remotely.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Technology, sometimes I hate it, but sometimes I love it. And,
we live in a great era.
Yeah, we do. I love the fact that I can connect with people all over the world to share these practices of yoga therapy. Certainly, everyone's invited to come see me in Oahu. I love sharing the island life and the beauty of nature, and it's really special to do yoga out in nature here. But for those that that's not on the radar, I do offer counseling sessions over the phone and Skype, so that whether we're doing more of a therapeutic session that's more talk related, that's easy to accomplish on the phone. If there's movement or practices that need to be seen visually, we can jump on Skype, and it's easy to walk you through those practices visually. So yeah, yay for technology.
Well, and it really, what I love about that, it doesn't matter where a person's located. They can definitely purchase your book and gain an understanding. And also then, if they want to kind of dive in a little bit deeper, then schedule up time where they can go ahead and do the yoga therapy with you on Skype or online. So that makes it so much nicer, and just I just love how the possibilities are always there and offered. So, let's say that someone's been following, a pretty good yoga practice, a yoga therapy practice for some time, and they have a pretty good yoga practice, but their life is just riddled with, like one conflict or challenge after another. When you're starting to work with somebody, what do you do with them when they come to you in that situation?
Well, what's interesting is that no matter how far along we are in our practice, until we take that leap into full enlightenment, we are going to have challenges. And I'm not going to promise anybody that by starting yoga therapy or a yoga practice that all challenges are going to disappear from their lives. But what's really beautiful is that we deal with them differently. I mean, I must say that as I'm a parent, I have a 17-year-old son, and I deal differently with the challenges of parenting, so differently now than I did many years ago before I was doing a steady meditation practice. And I would say that meditation really has made the biggest difference when we talk about the full spectrum of yoga practices. When I got serious about my meditation, and I started meditating minimally once a day, sometimes twice a day, every day, every day. I started to see a vast difference in how I manage stress, how I deal with circumstances that come at me that are conflictual, how I communicate differently in my relationships. And I'm pretty sure my son would say the same, because he has reflected to me that he feels a difference since I have become a very serious meditator. And so it's not that challenges go away, but it's that we have better tools to deal with them, and they don't throw us so completely off course. So something that might have just made you want to crawl into bed and pull the covers up and just not want to deal at all, suddenly you see it, you feel it for a moment. Yeah, it's difficult, but you have practices right there in your toolbox to reach for to help you get through that moment or period of time in your life where you are challenged. So
yeah, I would have to agree with you on the meditation. How long do you recommend that people meditate every day?
That's so hard to say, because I think everyone who has heard of meditation has certainly heard that it's beneficial. There's a lot of studies out there now, and it's being brought into everything from the military to corporations to schools and pretty much everywhere. So there's no doubt that it holds benefit. So people might know that, but they might not have any real idea on how to start. So a lot of times when I'm coaching somebody, I am helping them to set up a personal meditation practice and understand the tools that are going to help to make that consistent and doable in their life. One of the things is just to start small. Like any other skill that we want to build, we can't do it all at the first outset. We'll just get frustrated and then we'll quit. So I often will just encourage people to start by carving out 5 minutes a day to shut off their phone, shut off the computer, sit and close their eyes and just breathe. And that's a beginning. It's just a first step towards meditation. And then as you build the discipline of doing that on a daily basis, even that, you're going to start to feel a difference, just quieting down. And even if the mind isn't completely quiet, but you've quieted the external world for those 5 minutes, you're going to start to feel a difference. And then you can learn more about meditation techniques, and you can engage either through your reading or through a coach to help you progress, and then you'll add more time. I mean, ideally, I would think half an hour once a day is a great kind of standard to shoot for. The more the better, but I say consistency over length. So if you can only do 5 or 10 minutes, but you do it every single day, that consistency is going to show you better results than an hour once every 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, and I agree with you on the time in building up, and I think that's so important. And meditation practice, just in my life, when I started meditating, it really changed how things went from being basically how I was reacting to things, and then I started to be responding to things, as opposed to just kind of getting in situations and then feeling like, overwhelmed. It was much easier for me to stand back and not take things personally, and just kind of move forward. And and so in your book, True Yoga, do you feel anyone can benefit from the tools that you have in here?
Absolutely. These are such really basic tools for life. I mean, and they're universal values. I mean, we all want to feel peaceful. We all want to feel like we're living in the truth. We all want to feel a sense of abundance and security and self-control. These are just qualities, practices that help us to have a genuinely more happy life. And so there's no way that somebody couldn't pick up this book and read something that would help them. And I offer to people that they don't have to read it cover to cover. They could jump in, look at the table of contents, pick a chapter that has an interesting theme for them, and start there and jump around, because these teachings are not necessarily linear. There are ones that help create a foundation for others, but ultimately they're all practiced simultaneously. So that being said, you could start anywhere and start to gain benefit. And little bits every day will start to build up to a big result over time. And so all effort is a step in the right direction. And you can't wait thinking, I'll never be able to do all this stuff. Do something. Start somewhere. Just, pick a chapter and try one of the practices in the back of it, or sit with one of the questions in the back of it.
Yeah, I found your book very useful and very helpful. I mean, I could just basically pick up and just open up any page, and it really brings forth a a topic that it was like, oh, okay, well, boredom. Okay, well, let me check that out. That's kind of an interesting, thing to approach. And the one that I actually found that was really interesting as well was the art of introspection. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is, so as we are developing, that inward journey and cultivating that, how is that helping us in our everyday lives?
So the art of introspection, I mean, I love that too, and it is such a huge part of a yoga practice. It's called swadhyaya, and it's this ability to reflect on oneself at many different levels. So let's say we've had a conflict with someone, and we've raised our voices and maybe spoken sharply, and then at the end of the day, we're kind of thinking back about it, ruminating. Well, hopefully we're not still in the blame game and just going on in our minds about how wrong the other person was. The art of introspection is really seeing, how did I act in that situation, and could I have handled it better or differently? What would be the highest and most compassionate way to have communicated? So kind of reflecting back and thinking, maybe I could have stepped away from that situation for a few minutes, gathered myself, taken some deep breaths, and then come back and expressed myself. Maybe still expressed the same thing, but just expressed it in a kinder and softer way that wouldn't have fueled the conflict. So as we self-reflect, we're not just reflecting on what happened, but we're reflecting on how we were operating in all the situations of our lives. And there's a section of the Bhagavad Gita, which is another yogic text, that has 26 qualities that we are asked to reflect upon. And don't ask me to tell you what the 26 qualities are, but
they have to get the book for that.
Well, it's not even in the book. They have to email me. So email me, and I'll send you a link to that because I've written an article about it. But anyway, 26 qualities that are really great to reflect upon at the end of the day. They're qualities that we're meant to cultivate in order to become better yogis, according to the Bhagavad Gita, and the qualities that do bring us into greater states of inner peace. So the practice of introspection really is looking at where we can improve in order to move towards greater inner peace and truth. That's one level. The second level is, from an introspection or swadhyaya, the teaching of swadhyaya is also the reflection upon self, that self with a big S, the divine self that we're all a part of. And this is accomplished, according to the Yoga Sutras, through the study of sacred text. So if someone is a Christian, their sacred text could be the Bible. Buddhists would have different texts. And it's not really about religion. It's really about the sacred texts that reflect to us who we are as divine beings. And there's many different teachings around this in world religions. And what's beautiful is that ultimately they all boil down to the same thing, that we are love, that we are energy, that we are consciousness. And so, again, as we spoke about earlier in the conversation today, it's about changing our perception of who we really are. We're not just these conflicts and stories, dramas that drive our lives every day. Yes, that's an experience that we're having, but we can also step back from that and really recognize that we are more than that, that our true self is a divine being here having a human experience, and it's not always roses and puppies, but we can definitely keep coming back to love and compassion and the soul qualities that make the journey a little smoother.
Well, and a lot of times in my journey, I've met a lot of people that they might be really compassionate towards others, but where they have the hardest place in being compassionate is towards themselves. And do you find in cultivating, this practice that you have with True Yoga, that they're able to really come to a place of more self-loving, and where their inner thoughts are at least kind to themselves. Because I know, just from my personal experience, when I used to be in a very high competitive job, it would always be very critical. My thought process was very critical about, the work that I had done and how I could make things better. So, are you finding that when people come to you and they have, maybe some self-love issues, that those things are working themselves through?
Again, I think it's really just separating the difference between the small self, the personality self-love, and the higher or greater self-love. Mm-hmm. And when we start to identify more with our divine essence, it's easy to be in self-love because that essence is love. When we're operating down on the level of small self, we're always going to be coming up short. We will always find something that we can critique or, judge and find to do better. And it's not that we shouldn't try to improve. We should. That's that introspection, the first level of introspection, which is important at the end of the day. But we don't have to be critical. We can just recognize that that is a level of our journey that is imperfect. It is in process. It's evolving, and therefore we can be kinder and more compassionate with ourselves, recognizing that this is just a stage of the game. It's not the whole game. And we can be forgiving for our mistakes as we would forgive another. We can be compassionate with ourselves as we struggle through something, like we would be compassionate with a friend who's struggling. So yes, I do find that as people start to understand that parallel of self, they start to have an easier time of it. It also goes back to something I mentioned earlier, the teaching of ahimsa, or this sense of cultivating peacefulness. And if we're really going to practice that, we have to start within our own minds and hearts first, because we can't even really offer compassion or empathy to somebody else if we're in an internal state of agitation, stress, self-judgment. And although be looking like we're being all compassionate on the outside, we're not really practicing peacefulness, because the peace begins within, as the old bumper sticker says. And
but hey, it's a true bumper sticker.
It is a true bumper sticker, and I'm telling you, the conflicts that we see in our communities, in our politics, in our churches even, would not be there if all of these people were practicing ahimsa, if they were practicing peacefulness in their own hearts and minds. There is no way that somebody who is in that state of peace consciousness within their own being would act harmfully to another. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's show. Thank you so much, Jennie, for being on the show. What an amazing book, and you're definitely an amazing person, and we just love spending that time here with you today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was a delight talking with you.
Well, thank you, Jennie. It was such a pleasure to spend that time with you. If you'd like to check out Jennie's book, True Yoga, it's available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and all major retailers. And you can also visit her website, jennieleeyogatherapy.com. She's got some great events coming up, and definitely just want to check out her website, sign up for her newsletter, and be involved.